I'm Alex Morgan. I come from North Central Church of Christ in Bloomington, Indiana, and I'll be preaching from James 3, verses 1 through 12. On July 8th, 2010, at approximately 9:28 p.m., a very famous man went on one of the biggest TV networks in the United States to be interviewed. And while he was being interviewed, he said this: "With everyone watching, I'm going to take my talents to South Beach and join the Miami Heat." Now, if you don't understand what I just said, this is a quote from LeBron James when he went from the Cleveland Cavaliers to Miami Heat. And when he said this, it sent the entire country into conflict. And sports fans from all over could only talk about one thing. And it was whether they agreed with this decision or not. That was the only thing on people's minds, and it was all because of what he said. He was praised by some, slandered by many, and hated by Cleveland. But this is just a basketball team, and has nothing to do with LeBron as a human. But let me tell you another story. About 3 years ago, there was a baseball announcer for the Cincinnati Reds. His name was Thom Brennaman. And he was a broadcaster for a long time, and he had built himself up a great reputation. But one day, he said something extremely homophobic on the air, thinking that he was on mute, and he ruined his career and reputation forever. And now this ex-Major League Baseball announcer can only get small gigs for high schools that have no other options. And this is why James starts off chapter 3 with this: "Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness." And he starts with this because he knows that teachers and people that preach to the public are going to be held to a much higher standard. But I think what goes under the radar a little bit is this: and that's not only God is going to judge you with greater judgment for being a teacher, especially if you're preaching His Word, but also the public is going to judge you with greater strictness and is not going to let anything that you said wrong go unnoticed. Whether intentional or not, whatever you say will be used against you. And it's extremely sad, but people nowadays are just out to get you. It doesn't matter how perfect of a person that you are. People are out to ruin your life just so they can feel better about themselves. Continuing to verse 2, it states, "We all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check." And then skipping to verses 5 and 6, James writes, "The tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue is also a fire. A world of evil among the parts of the body, it corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and itself set on fire by hell." And now there are two ways that we can look at this. We can look at this just thinking about the preachers and how they need to watch what they say so they don't falsely spread the word of God, which is extremely important because I'm preaching at a preaching camp right now. But I realize a small percent of the population are actually going to preach. So I want to talk to you today about things like the story with Thom, an average guy who just ruined his life, and how your life can be turned upside down just like that. All by the intense power of the tongue. And how it can ruin your life in the blink of an eye if you're not careful, especially in today's day and age when everyone has a phone and social media. And if you're looking to go into a job where you'll be speaking in front of people for a living, something like a teacher or a business person or even an athlete, everything you say will be recorded. And everything you say will be available and manipulated by the public. So no matter what profession you go into, we need to watch our language. Not just cursing. We need to watch your language as a follower of Christ and represent Him and give all Christians an overall better look. But even if you aren't going to be talking to the public for a living, there will always be at least one person in your life that you will be called to bring to Christ. And I don't know about you, but if I was a person on the cusp of talking to someone about giving my life to Christ, I would much rather talk to someone who has a hold on their tongue, does not badmouth other people behind their back, and someone who is respectful to everyone that they meet, rather than someone who is always disobeying God and not treating people well. Because if you aren't showing Christian beliefs and morals, and people that aren't Christian are noticing it, you better not think that God doesn't notice it too. As Christians, we always have the spotlight on us. No matter if you are a preacher or not, people are always going to be watching you. James also talks about how blessing and cursing cannot come out of the mouths together. In our passage, James literally says, brothers, this cannot be. James says that grapes can't come from fig trees and figs cannot come from grapevines. But me personally, I live in Indiana, so I'm going to put this in a more current illustration. In Indiana, we have a scary amount of two things, corn and pumpkins. But even though there are so many corn and pumpkins where I live, me personally, I've never seen a pumpkin on top of a 10-foot corn stalk or corn going off a vine on the ground. It's just not how it works, and that's what James is trying to tell us. In this same way, as Christians, when we bless people, pray for them, encourage them through troubles, it should be just as impossible for us to talk bad about people and use foul language and talk about women in a lustful and inappropriate way. It should be just as impossible for us to do that as it is to see a giant pumpkin on top of a corn stalk. Therefore, as Christians in the spotlight, our tongues need to be consistently blessing people, not only in a public setting, but before our God Himself. Because Christian maturity does not exactly mean that we should be perfect with our tongues, because we know that is impossible. But what it does mean is that we need to be consistent with our tongues. So as Christians, as preachers, and as teachers, we are going to be judged more harshly, and we are going to face a lot of criticism, which is why, as Christians, we need to be consistently blessing people rather than be consistently cursing them.